Welcome back to Rise to Liberty podcast. Today, I have a very special guest, a returning guest, one that more people have wanted to hear from. Today's guest is Gray. How's it going, Gray? Thanks for joining.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Of course, you're always more than welcome on this platform. So let's just get straight into it. So I guess, what is Monarch? What is Project Monarch? I'm not exactly sure the right question to ask to get you in that direction. So I'll kind of just let you answer with that, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So, just as MK Ultra was an umbrella encompassing many subprojects of behavioral modification, Monarch is an umbrella over specific technology tradecraft, also related to behavioral modification, utilizing certain technology, frequency wave technologies, but also covering advanced physics, exotic weaponry, so on and so forth. Basically, Monarch is breeding and placement of personnel that maintain the most classified operations. And Monarch is the utilization of specific bloodlines, genealogy, family dynasties, which are also utilized in a fashion similar to the way that the government uses private corporations in aerospace to circumvent Freedom of Information Act and oversight. So Monarch is the umbrella and breeding and placement program that covers and is involved with all these deeply classified projects, including everything associated with the UAP fiasco, including all the behavioral modification, so on and so forth.
And for those who don't know, what is UAP?
UAP, these words are getting thrown around, I guess, unidentified aerial phenomena, basically, NHI, non-human intelligence, aliens, UFOs, whatever you want to call it, phenomena that's unknown. It's kind of, a generalized term.
X-Files stuff.
Yeah, there you go. The weird desk.
Yeah. Maybe we should have started with this. So last time you were on, you were in mask, voice changer. What changed?
Well, several things changed. When I decided to go public, again, I had a talk with my loved ones because unfortunately in 2014, when I had went fully public, there was a lot of collateral damage and, loved ones were hurt and worse. A lot of very bad things happened. As far as the true culprits that, really don't want things coming out and are willing to take measures to prevent that. I'm not hiding from them. There had been internal resolutions that failed, so on and so forth. But at least when I was going public, people close to me did want at least a thin layer of protection to at least prevent, public harassment and public nuisances to them. So we were trying to prevent that. Since between now and then, things have escalated. Bad things happened to me and those close. Just trying to get ahead of things and also have the freedom to not try to avoid certain issues or certain disclosures, so on and so forth. I just made the decision, along with the support of others, to just go fully unmasked and really address everything precisely and exactly for a layer of safety now under watchful eyes, hopefully. And also hoping to gain some public attention to leverage some of these existing channels to, take action that they should be. Unfortunately, public attention is needed to leverage what should be happening to happen.
Right. And it kind of seems, I'm not sure exactly how you feel, but it kind of seems like you being able to make the choice is a form of freedom because it was your choice. Nobody else outed you. And you were able to offer the public this form of transparency without that being used against you. It was your decision. Which is a positive instead of a negative, which they would have wanted it.
Well, to be fair, actually, I was doxxed behind the scenes by irresponsible journalists, irresponsible bureaucrats, and irresponsible parties involved that are actively, calling for whistleblowers to give them information. So I was doxxed and endangered by them. And then just malicious parties online also ended up doxing family and stuff like that. So to be honest, that did happen. But, now at this point, it's like, okay, that's already happened. Yes, everyone hasn't seen that and so on and so forth. But like, I can't constantly get this used against me. So now this is happening, yes, on my terms. So turning it into a positive and focusing on the positive aspect from it, the freeing aspect from it, even though it was in response, unfortunately, to negative, but doing the best we can with what we have.
So you got your hand played for you, but then you just turn around and took control.
Yes, and we expected this to happen from the very beginning. This isn't my first rodeo, as they say. So
right. So to get back into Monarch, this is, I don't know if this is the right adjective, but this is deeper into the MK world. Like, this isn't a lot of the surface level stuff, and this is something that even, I guess, and I hate these terms, but the community, the conspiracy community are even kind of split on if Monarch ever existed. And so this is not like the surface level stuff. Like, you can't go to Wikipedia to find anything that's of substance, which, I mean, if you pull up the MK Ultra Wikipedia, it's surprisingly honest, which was really surprising to me, since that's, controlled opposition. So what do you think it is? Like, why is there like this hesitation to embrace Monarch? Why is it the dynamic that exists, in your opinion?
Right. Well, and agreed about MK Ultra and Wikipedia, although there still is focus, in my opinion, away from the most pertinent aspects of it. As far as why Monarch's so controversial, there's several reasons. One is literal cognitive dissonance, and I hate saying cliche terms, but it is, not comfortable for people to actually face, especially when deep down they may not feel like they can affect it. It's much easier to bury, to go on with the day-to-day. Why, hold that pain with you? The other aspect is they have gotten ahead of the story. There is so much disinformation, even put out through, channels that were putting out good information, because if they didn't put out some good information, they couldn't get the foot in the door to be held credible, and then be able to disseminate the misinformation. In addition to that, it's just also, to be fair, one of these terms that are used, and there's so many different actual code names to these programs and constantly changing and so forth. It's just one of those terms that has been watered down, obfuscated, and, switched around, used improperly a lot. So it's just, a really dark area. But also, if you think about, just the general situation, I mean, how many of these classified programs and stuff do people really know about, right? I think it's more important than worrying about code names specifically, is worrying about things that are happening and how likely they are to be real, and so on and so forth. So if you break it down to actually like the problems, the events, the personnel involved, so on and so forth, it becomes a lot clearer. And there are communities and specific focused areas where that information can be obtained and verified.
So, just real quick, like, what was it started in MK Ultra? Did it start like after 73, after like the church committee hearings? Like, where is Monarch placed on the timeline of things?
Right. So, this is a very murky area too, and I can't give you anything that's verified on this. I mean, the important aspect, I guess, like if you're talking about when did all the MK Ultra umbrella research really fully get utilized and industrialized in ongoing operations? I mean, aspects of it already were by the time MK Ultra code word ever came. Important thing to say is by 1977, once the MK Ultra, declassified documents were found and the situation really blew with the church committee and so on and so forth, right when that was happening, things already had been realized that they needed to layer off some of the base conditioning methods to get pools of subjects kind of like automatically conditioned at the base level that then they can recruit up into it, right? They had to layer it off further. So in 1977, by the time the MK Ultra hearings blew in the Church Committee and all that, things had already been layered off. And in 1997, things were passed to where there was funding made for layered off organizations to really industrialize this. But as early as the National Defense Education Act and Project Talent, things were already in full swing that eventually fed into this. It's just, important. And there's still the same sort of upgrades always happening now. Monarch also really leans on undetectable and remote means and methods, right? As opposed to a lot of the older stuff, which was manual and direct. Thus, some of these operational aspects of Monarch now are just being implemented in a grand scale, and some of the old methods are being even further exposed, used to gain credibility to whitewash the now less obvious and overt methods that are being utilized wide scale as this technology has developed. This technology tradecraft, the technology and the usage of it, the methods of usage of it.
So would you say that it's accurate that what they learned with the MK research, that Monarch was the actual continuation, like the put into practice what they learned through the research?
Yes. And I mean, there's other things other than Monarch, but what Monarch is the breeding and the placement umbrella. So Monarch specifically handles the personnel, making sure that the personnel self-replicate, and making sure that all the individual pieces are placed in place, and is the gestalt that keeps things going. So, the Monarch is a gestalt. It is together the umbrella of everything it covers. It's more than just the sum of its parts. It's actually a self-replicating machine that spans generations. The plan is more important than any personnel. So it's the breeding and placement that uses what was derived from all the different methods into a self-replicating, self-ongoing machine to where there's nothing personal. If the rules are broken, they are automatically enforced. It's all about automation and replication. And
and so this is kind of like a self-healing wound, something that is able to take care of itself, even if the operator per se, the engineer of the train, if he goes, the train is still going to run.
Monarch is like Hydra, and let's put it like that, right? If you chop off a head, it's going to grow back even. Yes, it's got the self-healing aspect. Absolutely. And by design, it's a very intelligent design, and one that's very troubling, which is why the at-length conversations need to be had to provide context for people to understand it, but also as it ties into all these current events, the at-length conversations need to be had to provide context for people and whistleblowers coming forward. Otherwise, people won't be able to digest or truly understand what's going on.
Right. So with that in mind, exactly what is it that the public, the average Joe, what is it about any of Monarch or any of the disclosures coming out? What is it that they should know, like, first thing?
Number one is, you hear about these disclosures. I'm sure you've heard the term the program, so on and so forth. 100% of the personnel involved with the program. We're saying Monarch is breeding and placement, but they might not have been read into Monarch. They might have just been read into one specific area. Say you have a former, special operator, special agent in charge who is now public relations and involved with some of these task force and disseminating information to the public. What people need to understand is that 100% of personnel went through behavioral modification. Okay. Now they say, well, why is that important? Why that's important? And people also say, oh, how could it be everybody? it's not everybody in the big picture. It's a mandatory requirement to get to that stage. That way, they still have control and can cut someone loose or set off certain things if someone's not doing what they need to do. Yeah, why that's so important is because if people don't address it that are headliners, that are on the main stage, there's two possibilities. Either they are still under the influence of it, which would need to be addressed because they can be slipping in misinformation anywhere, sabotaging things, reporting people that are talking to them, so on and so forth. Or two, they are aware and they are complicit. There's not much middle ground for that, okay?
Right.
Of course, if they are aware they were in Monarch or related and are aware, right? So they might not seem like they're complicit, but you have to understand if they're not understanding it and talking about it at length, they can still be aware and still be under the influence of it. So it's just vital. If this conversation is not had, then you're only going to get canned responses, so to speak, that have been curated and prepared for the public. And we're talking about the insidious part is you'll have a spokesman, right, who truly means well and is doing the best they can and are earnest. And people that meet them in person, people that hear from them, they'll sense that. They'll say, no, this is a good man. I know he's doing his best. You might not have everything right, blah, 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 blah. I said, yes, and they're using that because they can feed this person information through remote subconscious patterning. I mean, and that's an extreme, but it gets so ridiculous that people have to understand, like, these are no dummies. You have architects, you have puppet masters, that are pulling strings and coordinating this. And these are people that, have done this. These are lifelong professionals that are absolutely top tier, best at their craft. So yes, it's, it's because too many people are compromised, and virtually everybody in the movement that's not addressing it is compromised. The level of that compromisation, how much it's affecting things, is obviously going to be a spectrum, but compromised is compromised regardless of intent.
Right. And this brings people to mind. I know you've spoken out about this, and not to point fingers. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But one person that comes to mind is Sean Ryan. And I'm not going to make a judgment call on what is or is not, or any of these things. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot either with regarding him. No, but he seems as though he's put out content that I've absolutely loved, and he's had conversations with people that I think are important conversations. But then in this last at the very beginning of the year, when there was the Trump Tower Cybertruck thing, and there was some of these other incidents, it just seemed so odd that he was already ready to go, like he was aware of these things that were happening. And I guess by bringing him up, I'm using it as an example of somebody who, to me, I'm not sure if he's aware of it or not. Like I said, that's not for me to say, but it just seems like there are these people out there that are trustworthy, that are putting out some information that's good, and then other times it seems like they flip a switch. And I mean, that is disinformation, or a disinformation artist. That's, the psyop.
Yeah.
And so with these certain these psyop outlets, or these disinformation outlets, what is it that people should be aware of when they see these certain things, or with these especially the alternative outlets? What should people be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, and it can be hard. And if I may, touching on Sean Ryan specifically, as long as we brought him up, it can kind of mirror, because the smaller they are and the more alternative they are, it gets a little bit harder at times, unless there's tells and there are things to work for. But let's just for a second take Sean Ryan, for example. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with what I have put out regarding him. Are you?
I am pretty familiar with it, but that's more more
No,
not for me to speak about.
no,
So,
understood. So here's the thing. When you have the number one show specifically for military aged male demographic, prior with the company, so on and so forth, if you don't think that they at least try to have their hands in it, come on, then what world are you living in? But, and I also
right,
need people to know that, like, it's not about pointing fingers and names. It's about a reasonable standard and making sure,
right,
that this is addressed. And before anything went public, there was more than due diligence in the background, right? From fishing out numbers and emails and going through, associates to address this properly to avoid, any collateral damage or public exposure that hurt people and their families, and not necessarily physically, but, in a variety of ways. But
right,
here's the thing is, if people are under control and not aware of it or being used to cause harm, it gets to a point where it needs to be addressed. If I was in that position, I would want it to be addressed. I would also be, I'm also, expecting it as I go public more, which has already happened. But I mean,
right,
what do people need to worry about? Well, I mean, it's hard if you don't have all the information firsthand. But for example, again, just sticking to his thing, he's had several guests on that are associated with MK Ultra and have a history, from Doblin, right,
right,
to Alexander. Okay, and just knowing the history and the massive information that comes from a variety of credible sources, as well as once you get into the survivor communities that were involved with this behavioral modification, some of these people are well known, with tons of people naming them. So what you need to be careful of is, when these things are brought up and certain subjects aren't touched, when certain subjects are whitewashed, which again, if you don't have all the information, might be hard to tell. But the other is, when people seem generally clueless. I remember when Sean Ryan had RFK Jr. on, and they asked, well, how effective do you think MK Ultra was? And you're like, well, what? Sir,
right,
you should be able to rattle off exactly how effective it was, especially with the use of Manchurian candidates and how that upscaled and has been
right,
applied in, increasingly effective ways, not to mention increasingly deceptive ways that are near undetectable.
right,
What are you talking about? If you mean well, and it's not about, oh, the public doesn't need to hear this, the public doesn't need to, no, hold on now. It's quite obvious when people are clueless about it. I mean, there's certain tales, and especially people, if they're in certain areas, there's information that they either 100% will know and were read in on, or two, that it was purposely kept from them. Okay, so there's hot topic issues, but whenever it comes to, I boil it down really to the behavioral modification. Why? Because of how important it is, tied in with all the top media outlets, how it's tied in with the personnel in these classified areas, and so on and so forth. This is the dirty secret that's getting exposed.
right.
And we're just now tiptoeing towards it with some people discussing different aspects. But that's a good gauge. It's a good measuring stick. Hey, if these people have information about behavioral modification, from MK Ultra to Monarch to New Age, if they address it realistically, if they mention the communities, Ramcoa communities, deliberate dissociative systems that are designed, so on and so forth, it's clear if someone knows about that or not. If they don't know about it or aren't talking about it, it's a major red flag, in my opinion. I mean,
Right.
you can get to so many things besides that, but the number one thing is behavioral modification. The bigger the stage, the more important. And it's not just, oh, well, they can't mention that. Oh, well, they can't mention that. When you have Rick Doblin on and you fail to mention his past, and are presenting, work that was used in MK Ultra as therapeutic, and this without warning and cautions of, the downside of it, because I think there are therapeutic elements that can be used in controlled settings in certain ways, in certain circumstances, but especially
Right.
not for people that it's going to re-traumatize that had it used on them in a negative way, right?
Right.
When they have that, when they're dealing with people that like Alexander, and, they're just dancing around stuff, and clearly, just they don't know what's going on, that's a major red flag. They're being used at best.
Well, and I here's the I guess this leads into one of the topics I wanted to bring up was I guess the controlled opposition, or the people who are still under control through some of their programmers, or any things within the survivor community, but just the, like, the researcher community, the disclosure community, all of this kind of wrapped up in one. Um, so those are the things that people should be looking out for. One thing I wanted to ask is how how likely is it for just your average Joe to come across somebody that they should be concerned about? And concerned is kind of a big word here. And specifically, what I mean is whether they're going to receive bad information, whether they're going to be intentionally led astray, or if they're going to find themselves in a situation that they might not want to be in.
Well, in personal lives, that's going to vary, greatly. But as far as social media and
Right.
when you turn on the TV, I mean, 100%, what's being fed to you is being fed to you by the same people that have controlled these faculties for a long time, going back to
Right.
Mockingbird, so on and so forth. Like, if you don't think the, media is completely controlled by the powers that be that are not looking, to progress things in the best interest of humanity, then I don't know what to tell you. But yes, what you're being fed, including what the algorithms boost, generally will be agents of dis or misinformation. Now, it would be too obvious if it's just they're blasting you. So, like, what you really have to watch for, I'm sorry, which is exposures being framed as new when they're very old. And I understand people want to get views and want to get headlines, but when they're exposing something that's not as publicly known, but like well established behind the scenes, be careful of that, because some people will use that for credibility.
Right.
When you notice people that have guests on that like have a mass information, and you notice like, they're not really going into the usual stuff or something. Well, they might just be using that person to boost credibility. Well, they wouldn't, why would they have them on if they were part of the machine? Well, because there was nothing new presented or nothing that's really harming anything. And basically all they've done is boosted their credibility, and now people are looking at them as a source of truth, thinking that they're going there, when in reality they haven't in any meaningful way. So,
Right.
I mean, as far as how much people do they need to be worried about that? I mean, they are coming at you, and they'll be at the front of the line, and they'll be at the second of the line, and then they'll also be like, in the back waiting for the next loop, just when you thought you got through them and are safe. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this is the day and age that we live with. But I mean, at the same time, it's just really, you get to a place where you're dealing with reasonable standards, and you kind of like have your own boundaries in this, and just don't put your trust in any one person, because even the best people can be used or have something mistaken, so
Right.
it's more about the message and not the messenger. And don't be looking to like dive into like follow something and everybody says, or think this is going to be truth. Like, if don't make urgent decisions, because lots of times that's based on reactions too.
Right.
Like if you're not able to change the world with your decision on this, there's no reason to rush into a decision. So
Right.
yeah, they're coming right at you hot. So
Right. And especially anything that gets you emotional, it's like,
oh yes,
and
yeah,
I catch
anything.
myself doing that all the time too, and I usually have to step back and be like, wait a second, why is this making me angry? Why is this invoking this response out of me?
Hmm.
That's one of the big telltale signs I've noticed. Um, and one thing I do want to point out is there are some really great people out there, but I do also want to highlight that you're 100% right. It's not the messenger, it's the message.
Yes, and I agree. It is great people. But yeah, if you put someone on a pedestal, eventually they're going to let you down, right?
Right.
And so on and so forth. But yeah, it's just really, the whole environment's about a short attention span, right? They're encouraging a short attention
Yeah.
span.
Right.
They're encouraging a constant state of got to worry about the next thing, got to worry about living the day to day, even if it's not finances making you live day to day, but there's new threats. So the important thing is to breathe, ground yourself, and take it one step at a time. Don't be in a rush. And it's a lot easier to, wisely apply discretion to information that's coming in. Just make sure you're in a good place to sort through things. And, it's not as bad. It's a lot easier to deal with, a lot easier to see through. And you kind of get to a good place and you start seeing through the facade, and you can tell when things are thrown at you. So, no, hold on.
Right. So I do kind of want to shift gears just a little bit, but the second part of the title, at least the working title as it is now, was the disclosures. Now, I kind of wanted to get into some of the things that you yourself, what are you focusing on? Like, what are the things that you're trying to bring attention to?
Well, thank you. So, now, as far as like disclosing, there is, important things that I think needs to be disclosed. I mean, the number one thing is, hey, we need to have a at-length conversation. 1 week of credible experience, not necessarily, I mean, who is credible, whatever, experienced people that know how to talk about this, hitting the major podcasts, right? You do a one major loop of that, like the world would have the context that they need. But, at-length conversations about behavioral modification, the communities that have long existed, what is known about the basis, and like the methods and means that external parties can activate, they can trigger, they can activate mechanisms in people that have been through this, and then ways that these mechanisms are internally set up in people to where they will automatically be triggered if certain conditions are met, unauthorized disclosure, so on and so forth. The other thing is, it really needs to be disclosed, like common sense, reasonable look at, hey, these main journalists, these go-to sources for whistleblowers, so on and so forth, they're compromised. They're used as drag nets, catch nets to get whistleblowers and information. Then they will contact them. They'll be friendly. They might even mean well, but they're being used by a third party. But they say, okay, you have this information. Ooh, that's something big for the public. If it's unapproved, if it's deemed too sensitive, right? If the powers that be don't want it, they'll try to suppress, contain that information, and the whistleblower, worst case comes to worst, they get retaliated on, neutralized, right? So what people need to really worry about disclosure is behavioral modification, having that full context conversation, and then why are people not presenting a safe way to address this? Because there are a lot of safer ways that doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out to address this in good faith, such as the protocols for organized safety, for example, which we can go into. But so when these people are, already known to have exposed whistleblowers to leak information, to have been compromised, when they're brushing shoulders with people who are historically known to be involved with behavioral modification, institutions that are historically known to be involved with behavioral modification, so on and so forth, like, okay, this is too many problems. Why are y'all not providing a safer way to prevent damage when there's really no nonsense ways to do this? It's very simple. So yeah, I mean, so for me, for the disclosure, before anything, to keep everybody safe and to provide context for necessary disclosures, behavioral modification must be addressed, and then the method that this information is making its way to the public needs to be addressed, which is through the compromised channels that are limited hangouts, gatekeeping operations, nets to catch more whistleblowers and information to prevent that exposure, and their artificial boosting, on social media and otherwise. That's the number one thing, because until we have that, disclosure won't be real. It will be canned. It will be steered. People are happy that the conversation is moving forward and they're getting some gratification. They're getting some validation. But in reality, it's a minimally ticked box in order to garner your support or your complacency to let it play out with time that we don't have. And the reason this is so urgent is because as we speak, there are reclamation and closeout programs running en masse that were designed to be rolled out with this controlled disclosure in order to neutralize whistleblowers and information that would otherwise expose what is being whitewashed, where they're serving up a couple of the ways that are old. Oh, we're taking down Diddy. Oh, we're taking down this trafficking, blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, those same parties are also pushing, for example, UAP disclosure. They're pushing for exemption for whistleblowers that were involved with crimes. In many ways, this is good, but it's set up so that the parties that literally program children with heinous methods can get exemption and then present themselves coming
Right.
forward as heroes. This technology tradecraft rollout has long been planned because now they can do the same behavioral modification with technology instead of the brutal, playground, sort of horrible methods. And
Right.
it's a lot cleaner now. So, and in addition to this, they're planning to roll out technology. They're flying toys, right? The billionaires and military intelligence wants to be able to use these publicly, as well as kind of like a mass surveillance grid, which are being used for
Right.
different things under the guise of healthcare and everything. In reality, a lot of this is behavioral modification transmission equipment that is used to control the populace through soft wide range frequencies just to affect in areas down to specific frequencies to people that have been conditioned. Okay.
Right.
And they know that this increased rollout that we're going through with this disclosure, new technologies rolling out. And it's well known the adverse health effects that this will have on society at large. And ICD 10 medical insurance codes have already been established at Skinwalker Ranch in a study by Christopher Kit Green. So they have already set up the ICD 10 codes to further treat the public of this mass increase in adverse health effects that are happening, coinciding with this rollout, and are only going to get worse.
Right.
Let me mention that this rollout, that study that was done by Christopher Kit Green, it was done at Skinwalker Ranch in a way presented that it's from unknown forces, possibly UAP, NHI, when really it's primarily exotic weapon testing and the behavioral modification. They did this at Skinwalker Ranch to make these codes. So as they're treating people, with these anomalous health incidents, Havana syndrome and all that, they still have the plausible deniability to say, oh, this wasn't us, this wasn't the government, this wasn't the globalists,
Right.
this was something unknown, and here we can treat you for it. But really, it's been set up. Also, Christopher Kit Green sees all the, special forces and so on and so forth that came into contact with things during missions. He gives them brain scans, checks their injuries and all this. In reality, that's part of reclamation and closeout. Once there's a problem in these programs, these people are all already under behavioral modification. And what happens is he scans them, all this, debriefs them, right? And either evaluated, either they can be reclaimed, move past this event and keep on utilizing them, or if it's deemed that they're unusable or they are remembering and disclosing sensitive information, then they will be what's called closed out, which can involve very heinous things to neutralize them, to affect their memory, to zap their brain into having
Right.
brain injuries and close them out. And Christopher Kit Green apprenticed under Puharich, which was one of the foremost mind control doctors that is responsible for a lot of what's going on, all this channeling, the nine, raw law of one, whatever, all that is. He literally made that and was experimenting with these space kids and all this, like set up all the behavioral modification, this new age stuff, and then it's being upscaled on the grand scale now. And his apprentices that were under him, that were doctors in these mind control programs, are the ones setting up these codes as it rolls out. Like,
Right.
it's there for everybody to see. Why are none of these headliners talking about it?
Right. So the way I've kind of viewed like all the UAP stuff, all the UFO stuff, is it seems like a convenient way to cover, because the one thing that pisses me off the most, I think, about the satanic panic is that, so unless you are continually in the programming and going through it, eventually it's going to start breaking down, right? And so
Precisely.
that was the first big batch of people in their 30s and 40s in the 80s and 90s, where they were going to start seeing the repercussions of all these behavior modification programs, and they needed a way to explain it away. Hence, satanic panic. Oh, this is all made up. This is rogue therapists and psychologists or whatever. And so they're controlling the narrative and the counter narrative, which is exactly what it seems like now. since, like you said, they're rolling out this newer technology, the directed energy weapons, digital ID, CBDCs, like all of these different things, plus the ramping up of the 5G weapon systems, and I mean things like
Complete
Neuralink,
grid.
right? It's just like 100% enslavement of people, and it just kind of seems like they're trying to explain it away with all of these UAP UFO disclosures. And I mean, it's long been known that the UFO community has been compromised almost from the beginning, and it just seems very convenient that now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they're admitting that aliens exist. It's like, well, I believed them until you said that they exist. you
No,
know?
precisely. And it's actually, in my opinion, even smarter than the, Satanist angle. And let's just remember the, the false memory syndrome foundation, is just thick with CIA, former CIA, and so on and so forth. Like, that's indisputable, right? And then you have ritual abuse statutes, criminal statutes, ritual abuse of children, criminal statutes that have exemptions for government research projects.
Right.
So not even getting into that, but yes. So, I mean, are there some people that believe in that and do it? Yes. But it's also used for cover, plausible deniability, kind of makes people seem crazy. And a lot of these groups that did that part of it, are kind of like third party doing the base level conditioning, that then certain subjects from that end up going up into the government in the program separated, and then some people in the program aren't necessarily bad people. All they know is, hey, we've got this person, they have these talents, they don't know what they went through. In some cases, but it's just it gets complicated and convoluted. But when you come to now with this disclosure, I'm not. It's an infinite universe. I'm not saying aliens aren't real and so on and so forth. Like I wouldn't say that, but that they simulate phenomena and as a means to an end is factual and actually standard in this. And the reason for this is, take Operation Northwoods, declassified way back. What we were going to do was commit real terrorist attacks. False flag doesn't mean fake necessarily. Real terrorist attacks on our own people, on our own Americans, and blame it on Cuba to justify war, okay? But if you blame it on aliens, if you blame it on NHI, if you blame it on UAP, it's not like Cuba's going to say, no, we didn't do that. Well, are the aliens going to come out and say, no, we didn't do that, this is a false flag, right? You know what I'm saying? They can also use that for globalists from different areas that usually are overtly kind of against each other, Russia, China, US, right? To have to unite, under those false pretenses, but to unite, and the people say, hey, if these guys that usually don't get along are, talking about, oh, we've got a bigger threat, we need to come together, this seems real, and they might be able to pass something off that's otherwise a really hard sell. So it's really a very smart cover with plausible deniability. And it's just like I hate using analogies when some people do this, but it's just like a hammer, right? You might hammer in the nail, but also it can be used to pry out with the other end. So, say someone has real experience, right? Well, then they simulate that experience with different ways, and kind of give them something similar or expound on it. Either they piggyback and steer them, or they do it. And now people say, okay, well, I'm remembering this and it's the same thing, but this was government. So I think the first thing was government. So you can't tell. If someone has like a positive, good experience, they can piggyback on that to steer them. If someone has a bad experience, so they can use it, it's used for more than one way. And like the main goal of anything is, if people know something, or you don't want them to be sure. So you just get it to the point where, like, well, we got all this going on. The public, they don't know who to believe. They don't know what to latch on. So there's uncertain. And if you got everybody, you can create order from chaos. So like they might not even necessarily have, oh, we're routing this here. Well, hey, let's just clusterfuck this and make it, just to where people don't understand what's going on, and then we'll try to steer what we can from there. And it's also important that, they need a few different agents in a few different areas that basically are, you know, more desirable or kind of like resonate better with certain demographics. Because if you don't have a few options, you're always going to have your few stray groups. So, you know, they try to
Right.
get it well spread. And agents of the same people might genuinely be fighting each other in the public eye, and they might not even know that they're being used. Just like, again, the way, you know, wars are fought, right? You got people going way back funding both sides of the wars, so on and so forth. These same groups are literally the culprits of this.
Right. And so, I mean, this is narrative control, counter narrative control, and counter narrative control. And then whatever they want to happen is actually usually what ends up happening because they're able to direct whatever because they control all sides.
Yeah, and you know what? You might say, well, why is nothing happening? It's taking long. They might be fishing. They might be, you know, throwing in different stories and seeing which one catches on, and it takes a while for one to catch on, right? But, you know,
Right.
it's like, okay, if a situation that they don't want is happening, they'll just throw the kitchen sink at it and make so much going on. Everybody's like, whoa, you know, what's going on? They might have a big event to take attention over there. Whatever it is, you know, if there's something they don't want going on, make it real messy, make it impossible to tell what's going on, you know, and then make surgical strikes and try to get one that latches on, right? Different bait, different lures, you know, different
Right.
methods, switch to the different part of the lake. What, you know, it's convoluted, and, you know, these people know what they're doing, you know, they've had
Right.
lots of practice.
Right. I mean, you know, a lot of these people were able to teach, you know, these jungle militias in Central America, these things. It's like I always think about the CIA guerrilla. What was it?
Iran Contra.
Yeah, the Iran Contra, the CIA created the psychological operations manual that they were able to teach these rather you know, less educated people such a complicated subject very easily. So these people have gotten this stuff down to where they're able to explain it to almost anyone if that's what their desire is. And I think it's interesting because I was always told that if you are unable to explain something to a child and have them understand it, then you probably don't understand it well enough to be able to explain it to other people. And these people have gotten to a point where, I mean, they're able to just they do it without even thinking about it at this point, is what it seems like. So, one thing I wanted to talk about, and then I wanted to move on to organized safety, is poisoning the well. There seems to be a lot of people, and this kind of goes into you know, the control of the counter narrative and counter narratives. But what are some of these things that I know you had brought up one red flag. What are some other things that maybe should be brought to attention for people to say, like, hold on, wait a second, I need to take a closer look at this, or maybe this is not something I should pay attention to? Of course, that's all like internal and personal for each individual, but what are some things that you would point out?
Right. Well, it's hard for me to point here, and there, but I guess in general, like, so poisoning the well, you you know, you hear the saying, like, you know, good dis or misinformation is like 90% true or 99% whatever percent true, right? Mostly true, right? Because otherwise they wouldn't be able to get their foot in the door, wouldn't be able to get credibility, so on and so forth. So what a real red flag would be is, say there is a general or someone that goes by the term general, right? Who's, you know, and you know, say there's people that love him, people that hate him, and there's different exposés of him where he's been dirty, right? So say you have you know, someone that is exposing him, all his dirty ties, this and that, and like there's some stuff that really makes sense, checks out with other people and all that. Then you notice certain attacks on him or certain exposés don't seem credible as much, or aren't the same sort of thing, or that they're also just talking about, you know, ridiculous topics. And don't get me wrong here, like, I'm not trying to say, oh, people shouldn't talk about ridiculous topics because it takes credibility away from other stuff. I mean, if you are like someone who works to expose, yes, certain topics can cause you to lose credibility. But what I'm saying is, say you expose this person in some verifiable military corruption, some other ties to organizations and historically, but then you are pushing some other aspects that are really out there exposing him for. They just don't seem credible. And people say, oh, well, they're just more dirt. They might not be right about that. What you have to watch is people will deliberately piggyback on what's already exposed and then slip in fake things. That way, and also talk about wild stuff. That way, when it comes time, say like for whatever reason on the big news, right? Or like on the, flood, what's going around, what's trending, I guess nowadays you'd say,
Right.
say this comes up. And then they look at like top accounts with the largest followers, right? They're not going to focus on the credible exposés. No, what they focus on is the piece of misinformation that was slipped in there. And they can say, well, this is disproved. And also look at what this person is talking about. This is ridiculous, right? So then by proxy, everything else they say doesn't need to be disproved because they've already shown one thing to be so utterly fake and that these persons deal with ridiculous topics that, the other real expose, like they don't directly address that. It's just smeared by proxy. So you just really have to watch for them sneaking in that little bit. If it doesn't make sense, if it doesn't do that, like people can make mistakes, but look for a pattern of it. Say, hey, that all information was already out. That all information was already out. That was information out. Okay, this is new. This is kind of from you or from you and that other person. There's other people in the community aren't really behind this. You kind of got to look for a consensus. And when I say a consensus, I don't mean the popular consensus. I mean from privatized areas, from like focused groups that really deal with these areas, right? If they're not on it, that's going to be a red flag if these big accounts are on it. I know people try to get ahead of the story and stuff. Like this isn't a perfect science, But you just got to really watch. If they slip something in there that doesn't seem right, it might not be that they're just wrong. It might be that they're deliberately slipping that in there. That way it smears everything else by proxy. That's the number one tactic to, focus on one piece of disinformation that's inserted to smear the rest by proxy. A similar thing happened with Pizzagate back then, so on and so forth. They kind of like focus on the one thing that just, has problems. And then
Pizzagate,
like, people
COVID,
don't even bother looking
9/11, all of it.
Exactly. They find one thing to focus on that they artificially boosted specifically to smear the rest by proxy.
Right. I call those people kooks, the kook shit.
Instead of spooks, kooks.
Right. And, because you like in the 9/11 community, like 9/11 truth is dead because of some of these people. Like you got the no planers, that no planes ever hit the towers. And it's like, that is what? And
there's a couple dingers, and if they're not focusing on that, you have to question, like NORAD standing down and so on and so forth.
Right. And it's just crazy that like, it's just, I agree with you. Like there's these certain things and some of them are super subtle. Like the subtlety kind of took over during COVID with some of the information being pushed out. Although you hear certain things like the lab leak theory. Initially, that was written off conspiracy theory. And now it's like everyone's like, well, yeah, that's exactly what happened. But at the time, I mean, people were censored for that. I think this is one of my biggest pet peeves, the term conspiracy theory in general. It's, a weaponized term meant to just disparage and discredit anyone. And so people don't have to deal with it or pay attention to it. And like you said, to discredit things that might be real by proxy.
Yes. And, people have to remember conspiracy is a term that's widely used in the legal system. I myself was charged with a conspiracy at one point in time. So, what are people talking about? Conspiracy, like that sounds like something that some people could be conspiring and you have a theory about it. Okay. So are we going to prove or disprove that? It's obviously been weaponized heavily, and it's, you're going to run into stuff like that. And another thing about 9/11 is a big one, and there's a lot of big ones, but also people have to be careful about throwing all their eggs in one basket. and
Right.
just like hinging the success of exposure upon one event because it gets over concentrated. They apply things to it, obfuscate it. It's hard. It's good to pick a few things and like set reasonable standards and so on and so forth. Things can be drawn out and delayed in one subject that you're pursuing so hard. Even if there's something real good, that they can run out the clock while new things are measured. Things are moved around. Now, by the time you finally get the truth, there's no one to be held accountable or responsible for it because so much time has elapsed, right? So
Right.
you really got to watch about throwing those eggs in one basket and hinging success of exposure upon one event or one thing. And I know I say that as I'm like, well, it comes down to behavioral modification, but the way that's applied and like how that obfuscates all the issues, that's a little bit different. But don't get me wrong, I'm also worried about specific events as opposed to that. It's
Right.
just, that's kind of not the same way I'm saying. I just wanted to address that because it's
Right.
slightly ironic or hypocritical.
Well, and it is kind of ironic, but also behavior modification is also another umbrella term, like that
Oh,
covers
yeah.
a lot of different things. And so it's an umbrella in an umbrella.
Yeah.
So it is a little bit different because I mean there's so many aspects to it, but you should definitely never put all your eggs in one basket at all because then you end up with no eggs, just like everyone these days, apparently. you know.
Ah, ah.
uh, so okay, or organized safety. What is it? What are you doing with it? What's the purpose? Like
Right.
where are we at?
So organized safety, there will be more things rolled out. And we're in talks with different parties for funding and thus and forth. Like I had been funding it with a small group of people. Unfortunately, due to retaliation, I was forced to close my business that I was funding, some of these aspects of it for. So that has slowed down. But there will be survivor support for survivors of behavioral modification, support for whistleblowers, so on and so forth. And also kind of like, simple steps to help, just resources, so on and so forth. But primarily what we're focused on now and what's operational and active is organized safety is an outlet. It is an intake tip reporting form for survivors and whistleblowers of events that are typically protected, whether it be some of those, playground lovers rings that include some VIPs, very important parasites is what I would say,
Right.
just like, Nygaard, Epstein, think about all the people that reported on Nassar. Larry Nassar with the Olympics. I went through some of this last time, thinking about all the people that reported Sandusky. Think about all the people with Epstein. They got the sweetheart deal. There was multiple levels again. Just all this, right? Boy Scouts, Eagle Scouts. You have the Explorer program for the police, right? To where they were getting the young recruits in there. All this, right? You have all these abuse things, and then it ends up getting covered up at different parts. For people to report on that, a lot of times it's an arduous event, and they get blowback internally. The people that are dealing with them aren't necessarily kind. It can hurt, but also they don't necessarily know where that information is going to be took, and it can compromise them. They can get retaliated on. It's really high impact on someone's life, and then also it can be discouraging from them to do it again. So what organized safety is, it is an end-to-end encrypted intake form. You can completely anonymously submit information. We have 4 categories. One is person of interest. And obviously, it's very well formatted. So it kind of asks the questions that need to be asked, right? To kind of help, because sometimes people don't know where to start. So then you have location of interest. Again, right? And location and person of interest also have small categories where you can associate with either previous reports or with different people and locations, accomplices, right? And so on and so forth. But if there's in-depth information, you do need to submit one for a person, one for a location. Again, you can list accomplices and so forth, but if it's in-depth information, it does need to be a separate report. But so you have person of interest, location of interest. You have just basically other general report, which is just kind of free done, just blank space to write whatever you want and, file upload, stuff like that. And then you have, help organize safety, which is if you have some expertise or so on and so forth, or you want to help, fund, for survivors and for the process, so on and so forth, anything like that. That's on the form as well. But so the key to this is before we get into the background of it, is that it's anonymous submission and it's encrypted, as low in impact as possible. You just type it, goes away, boom. No one has to know it was you. You got the information, is going through to places. But if you would like, and what we do is recommend that you use like a Proton Mail email address. We recommend you starting a new email address that you keep so you don't lose it. And obviously end-to-end encrypted, right? So we recommend that you can leave that. And there is an option for one, to get a copy of your report. Two, for you to be contacted if there is corroboration detected in our system, okay? So if you reported, suspect A, by name, obviously, right? And then there's other reports of that person in our system, boom, detected. And we can have a liaison contact people independently and then see if they want to discuss each other. It's important as a first step that they didn't know each other, because that provides blind cooperation, which is a lot more meaningful, okay?
Right.
So there is the option to get a copy of the report, an option to get notified if there is cooperation. And then the third option is, if you're not as worried about security, you can allow permission to be contacted just for general follow-up questions and so on and so forth like that. Just, if you're not as worried about security. So the thing is, it's a smart system that builds blind corroboration, of course, getting towards preponderance of evidence for civil law and getting towards burden of proof for criminal law, right? So that's what it's all about. It's about a low impact and as safe as possible for reporting, for giving tips, of suspicious activity reports, right? And then also a method for building blind corroboration with the option to be notified of that, to link up with people. Imagine if all the people reporting Epstein went to that, and then were able to get together with competent lawyers that really wanted the right thing to address it. And then you go and say they're giving him the sweetheart deal anyways, right? Well, guess what? All those people are already together, and then we can leverage public attention to say, hey, no, don't let them brush this under the rug. You see what I'm saying? So basically, yes, it's as safely as possible is a report intake form. And it is, blind corroboration, building the database. And, obviously in the background, that information is also being used very responsibly and safely, but strategically to affect change in the background as well. So, it's just really a smart system to address these protected crimes, corruption, so on and so forth. And there's nothing really quite like it that exists. And people should be asking themselves why. And especially, for this very thing, like all this really ties in heavy with behavioral modification, which is a large reason the Epstein thing was covered up and stuff. But yeah, so it's just really a smart system. And keep in mind, so tying in with the behavioral modification, let me, I guess, touch lightly, taking Epstein, for example. Those weren't just, PDF rings with VIPs that were all there for pleasure. Some of it is involved with behavioral modification, to where they are training some young assets to become honeypots, blackmail, stuff like that. And then sometimes these VIPs are tied in with military intelligence and trauma bond to them as handlers when they're young, just like someone would bond to a dog that's been trained in different ways, whether it be for detection, or whether it be for personal property protection, executive level, so on and so forth. So these people go there to learn the triggers, the activation sequences, how to handle, and then they actually trauma bond with these assets that they can trigger, activate, and use. And they end up making a network of them inserted in all the different places in life. So that's why a lot of this gets covered up. Now, going back, organized safety didn't just start out of thin air, okay? It started inspired and expounding upon the work of Valerie Wolf at the 1995 Advisory Committee for Human Radiation Experimentation. And there was a presidential hearing committee that heard this testimony. And
that was Bill Clinton, correct?
Bill Clinton ended up making an apology that slightly whitewashed this, but yes, he ended up making an apology for all this happening at the different institutions. The main focus was on the radiation testing and things like this, which, by the way, were done in conjunction with seeing how some of these advanced physics and frequency, whether it be propulsion systems on advanced aircraft or some of this behavioral modification frequencies, seeing how it tested on people, finding people that were more resilient to breed, but also specifically the underlying base conditioning applied to all personnel. Manchurian candidate level, but not single-use Manchurian candidate
Right.
patsy. We're talking about Manchurian candidate level base conditioning that applies to many different models, okay? In a week and a half in 1995, before all of the internet and easy networking and communication, while people were scared for their lives, in a week and a half, when Valerie Wolf, who was a dissociative trauma therapist, heard that she, got the go-ahead to provide the information she had at these hearings, around 40 therapists contacted her with tons of information from their patients, and they had blindly corroborating information of culprits, perpetrators, of locations, of program names, of methods, and
Right.
and they brought that forward relating to mind control on children. Behavioral modification is mind control, but we're talking about specific Manchurian candidate level. There was two
Right.
models disclosed. Chris DiNicola gave her testimony, which was basically Delta spy assassin training, and also mentioned that they tried to get her to commit Omega programming, which is self-termination, whenever she started remembering, which is one of the reasons these people that deal with this, whether it be journalists or otherwise, have to become familiar with this so they don't mishandle people and cause problems, or expose them to malicious third parties that will cause these problems deliberately, who are looking and actively setting up situations. Right. Then there was another Claudia Mullen disclosed what's known as beta sex slave honeypot model. Okay, and
Courtney
some people,
Love.
some people
Courtney
end
Love.
up some people end up, being a multifaceted model that will have alpha, which is kind of base programming, beta,
Right.
delta. Theta is what some people have heard of, the psionic assets. That's a theta. Right. There's different things like this. So there was only two.
Just before you move on real quick, this is kind of based on brainwaves, right? Like the alpha, beta, delta, like all of these things.
Largely, but not only, because even for each programming, like a lot of the brainwaves definitely is part of it and crucial.
Right.
But all of these exist in isolated neural networks, it would be the term.
Right.
Nowadays, if you get into certain fields, they call them internal family systems. Way back, they would be called multiple personality disorder. In the middle, you have dissociative identity disorder, or in the DSM-5, dissociative not otherwise specified, dissociative disorder not otherwise specified, but it's basically essentially programming, a programmed system. So you'll have different models with different alpha, beta, delta, blah, 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 combination of them. And some of them end up being politicians, bureaucrats. Some of them end up being law enforcement. Some of them end up being a doctor. Some of them end up being homeless. Some of them end up being a school teacher. Some of them end up being a handyman. Some of them end up being a commercial cleaner that have keys and access codes to places all over town, so on and so forth. They strategically place these people all over. Not every one of them is active duty. A lot of them, the majority, are what's known as reserve or sleepers. Okay, not all of them will be tapped, but if they get in a useful position or otherwise needed, they may be routed, or if they are in place and it's beneficial, then they will be tapped and utilized. There are schedules for maintaining these people who are listed and tracked on what's known as HCS, human control systems, human intelligence control systems, and they are monitored throughout life. This goes back to original Project Talent, which, selected, kind of like gifted people and then monitored them throughout life under the NDEA, which ties in again to GATE and all these sub-projects where they were going through this development and different testing. All this is tied together and, rolled into Monarch as part of the breeding program, to where people are monitored, put on lists, monitored for life. Some people get more programming, some people don't, but everyone that makes it to this list has that base programming. So anyways, the work of organized safety was based, inspired, and expounding upon the work of Valerie Wolf and, her associates who exposed this, who disclosed this at the 1995 ACHRE with the blindly corroborating information. And we have been launched since 2013. Okay, I've been doing this over a decade personally, which I am the founder of Organized Safety, and I'm the only one that's actually went public, which is why I'm kind of the loudmouth liaison now. There's a lot of people with way more expertise than me. I've been doing this over 10 years, okay? They, at this point, have been doing it over 30, people that I'm still working with, okay? So, you know, there's already a lot of existing information that brought this here, but we're launching it publicly now as more of a poll for as contemporary information as possible, if that makes sense. So we can really apply this. We've, you know, sent samples to different people. You don't want to know how depressingly bad it is on the back end, but there are people that are being made aware in the right places and progress being made. But there is a reason that there's not intelligent designs like this from other parties, and you know, like, it's irresponsible of people not to come up with safer reporting ways and ways to put this together. It makes no sense other than the fact that it makes perfect sense in a way that you don't want it to, you know?
Right. So ultimately, it's going to be a database.
Is a large database already.
Is a database.
With, yes. If I told you the number of corroborating points, it might not be believable. But this has, again, been going over a decade with groups of people coming out of these, some left with their own databases and lists that they were handled in their charge, because some of these were so completely contained and compartmentalized operations. You understand? Also with plausible deniability where some's not claimed. A lot of the information we have isn't even technically classified because it technically doesn't even exist. But
so with that, how is the, I guess, how is the database used? Like, are journalists able to get a hold of it? Obviously, like, this is something that you're not just gathering it just to have it, right? Like, it's going to be used. So I guess
already is.
I guess what I'm asking is, how is it able to be used while you guys are able to, I guess, keep control of it without it being compromised?
Right. So as with anything, right? Like, I mean, you know, what's the cutting edge technology, all this? Like, here's the deal is, you know, it's end-to-end encrypted. We don't host the intake ourselves. And the reason for that is there's good reasons for that. But so, you know, the host of this should not even have access to it. And, you know, by all accounts and methods, they do not. It's not kept on that long. You know, there are dumps from the host system to our private database that is completely offline, and that happens regularly, okay? So it's not hooked up to the internet in any way, shape, or form. The bulk of this is not hooked up to the internet. It's completely isolated, okay? So people make these encrypted tips. It goes into the database, everything's completely offline, and gets analyzed there. Okay. Obviously, if people, you know, cooperate and stuff like that, and it merits it, and they've agreed to, you know, there are some liaison contacts made, so on and so forth. Meanwhile, with that, it has been building the network so we can see what things are getting funneled through, because, you know, a lot of what's going on is, you know, ran through family dynasties, is ran through, you know, private parties, is ran through temporary front shell organizations that are set up and then closed down, you know, so on and so forth. So, like, to give an example, one, we use it for investigation and to understand the network, making sure if only one person has reported a party, you know, and we think that they might not have been exposed elsewhere, we're not doing anything that would lead back to them, even if they haven't named themselves to us, right? If that makes sense. Like, we're very careful. You know, most of us come out of behavioral modification systems and have been, like, actively, you know, healing and, you know, in a professional manner for well over a decade. Like, this isn't anything to play with, right? It was a long time, even with the system that I designed and moving forward, it was a long time before I even gained access to a bulk of things to act on it, because it is no joke. We take operational security very seriously. Certain elements, if enough is named and we're not worried about, like, exposing it and watering down, like, if something's not named, it means a lot more if someone names it. If someone names, like, at this point, you know, Clinton, like, it's like, well, everybody's named him. It's not like a huge deal, right? So, like, if stuff gets to a certain level, you know, we might start addressing it publicly. You know, certain things are put out there. We use it for investigations, for information dissemination, but also once we have some of this cooperation and so on and so forth, one thing that had been going on recently leading up to where me and some of my associates were retaliated on, but not actually the people involved with giving these tips, because they weren't shown. But what we had was, hey, we are going to get some key cases. We liaisoned with the witnesses, and they completely advise them of the risks and so on and so forth, they are on board. We said, hey, we have aligned to some law enforcement. We have aligned to some exposure here with some bureaucrats, whether it be, staffers through Senate Select Committee of Intelligence, armed forces committees, so on and so forth, whether it be showing to direct bureaucrats, direct politicians, so on and so forth, which we're very careful about because we know that some of these people are under behavioral modification themselves. Like, we're experts in behavioral modification, which is the first and foremost thing that needs to happen. So, what we were doing was we say, okay, we have a couple sample packages to where we're showing you a little bit of evidence and a little bit of the witness testimony and the person being named, the location being named, so on and so forth, just to let you know we're serious. Let them know about the system, that we have a large database, but before we start handing over any information, we need to know where the information is going. We need to know that you're safe and secure and that we're not exposing people without a good shot of actually being effective. We're not here to just turn it over as we get it and then hang these people out to dry. If we were going to do that, they should report it themselves. You see what I'm saying? So we really go through everything, find what's credible, find what's actionable, carefully present it while keeping witnesses informed, stabilizing it, and so to speak, in one thing, because it can be stressful. If someone's saying, hey, I'm taking your testimony, going to show it to, some people on the Hill at DC, and we might need you to testify, it's stressful, right? So we get permission to let everybody know and so on and so forth, show some sample packages is what we call it. And then, kind of take it from there and see if these people are acting in good faith, see if these people are serious, because a lot of these people, unfortunately, that are in place, whether it be in key places in law enforcement, whether it be in these committees, or whether it be whatever, a lot of these people are actually made it there, not because they're good at what they do, but because they are weak and controllable. And that's just facts. I'm not here to offend anybody. But anyway, so that's kind of like what goes on with that information flow. We use it as safely, responsibly, strategically, and effectively as possible. And if we're progressing in any serious way that would ever even remotely expose someone, we coordinate with that person, parties prior, of course, which is it's got to ask more questions. Like, look, I'm not a rocket scientist, neither are the people I work with. Why do we have that? Why are we doing this? What are y'all doing? This is a clown show. I'm sorry, and I hate using these cliche terms, but it's bad, it's depressing, it's scary to see how inept some of these people are, to see how compromised they are. And what they keep on pushing, well, no, we just need this. We don't want this. We just want a pilot that was involved with recoveries. Hold on. You just want us to feed a little enough that you can chop it off without any blowback on your end. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. If we're going to do something, we're going to know that that there is a conducive situation. And unfortunately, on the back end, that's very limited. So now what we're doing as I go public is we're kind of bringing the principles of this, the common sense, and explaining it, and then leveraging public attention. One, so people like me and others are a little bit safer because we're under the public eye. Two, so we can get some public attention to leverage the existing channels to do their job,
Right. And so it kind of, how many stories have you heard a journalist or investigative journalist, a researcher, somebody just gives over information and it disappears? And it just never goes anywhere.
They're used specifically for that because they're already set up in place. I'm sorry, but the majority of these journalists aren't there because they're good at exposing crimes or corruption or anything like that. They're there because they have vested interests, and people that handle the situation, understand how to manipulate these people. It's not hard to pull people's strings, especially if they have vested interests, whether it be fame, whether it be money, whether it just be, anything in between. So, you hear all the time, and just to be honest, I use myself because I've already been publicly exposed because, the culprits already know who I am, so on and so forth. And I'm not the only one, but several of us kind of ran skirmishes. And, we're basically canaries. You familiar with the canary in the coal mine? If the air's bad, it will go so the miners can get out, right? So basically we were playing canary to keep the people behind us safe and say, okay, we're going to go through these channels, see what happens. Our information's leaked. Retaliation. This and that. Because these people are in place, whether they're inept, right? Whether they are complacent, whether they are complicit, whether they're corrupt, compromised is compromised. And what's happening is, there's only approved information is being released. Okay. If unapproved information comes through and the person's not willing to play ball, then there are forces at work to neutralize these people. They want to suppress, they want to contain. First, they'll string them along. They say, okay, well, don't talk to any other journalists. I'm going to work with this, but, I need to focus, blah, blah. Hey, it's taking a little longer. A lot of good information on the back end. Just wait, hold on to this little bit. Hey, I need you to go dark for a little bit. It's hot right now. It's shady. Like, every little thing in the book. Some of it for compromised situations, some of it not. Some of it just just them like having vested interest in being selfish and being, pompous, exploitative,
Right.
So there's everything in between. But yeah, the standard for it, like, they're not, I don't know any big journalists at all. And I've went through the big ones and tested, as well as like, I don't spit out too many numbers, but plenty of people I know personally and have seen the communications, including recorded calls, including recorded video calls, and including, logged messages. Like, I've seen how this plays out, and I can for 100% fact tell you that these top journalists and these headliners are compromised. At best, bad things have already happened to several people, including myself and associates. It's real bad. It's not safe, and they could be doing better, but they refuse to on purpose.
Right. So I guess the last question I have about organized safety is what is the end game? What is like the where does it go? What is, I mean, obviously this is like you have a goal that you want to be able to reach, and you have the little goals leading up to it, but where's the big goal, that the actual end game?
Right. Well, I mean, I don't necessarily think that we have an end game as much, because, it's kind of like an ongoing service that needs to be done. If, you're reporting it's not getting done, or, something's compromised or whatever, like, we still will always facilitate building information and connecting the right people to pursue justice. Right. So that will always be happening. But what we're trying to do is, and keep in mind too, so like, one of the things now we're just scaling up to do, because this just went public, right?
Right.
What we're looking to do is, like, we've made standalone systems in the past that's based on the same principles, but say if people in a local community like know a pastor that's done something, if people have heard about something happening in a school, a coach has been doing something, right? It might not feel safe to report to that school. So say we make a standalone system that these concerned parents or something get together, we, talk to a group at length, see their good faith and all that, and they can run a standalone system completely separate from us that we don't have access to, and then they can be like, hey, scan this QR code if anybody needs to report anything fishy, and see, right? So like facilitating local activity for people to safely pursue justice in their own community, finding more members of the team that are willing to help and give their expertise. But really what we're looking to do, other than the information and database, all that, is to create funding to help individual survivors, because it is a horrible situation for them. And the only other ones that really are helping survivors are mostly faith-based, which is great, but not everybody feels comfortable with that. Relates to it. Not everybody qualifies. So, we're just trying to, in general, help survivors of behavioral modification and whistleblowers, so on and so forth, as well as we'll be building resources, having a forum for people to kind of safely discuss. Social media, there are people hunting for survivors to announce themselves, pull their strings, say disparaging things, upset them, to exploit them, to whatever, right? So like kind of creating a safe place for people to, and there's already long-standing survivor communities that have this as well, to be clear. But so we're looking to build that, but really looking to build the resources especially.
So I guess really the idea is to stay on the heels of these people, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, we're here to disseminate information publicly that will assist in the exposure and the restriction of crimes and corruption, right? And educate the public to demystify some of these kind of out there aspects and kind of cut through the BS, but also obviously to help survivors, actually make a healthier transition and move forward, finding some closure that they can and getting the support that they need to move on as much as possible, in a productive manner where, they can help, where they can just take care of themselves and, flourish,
Right. Honestly, I absolutely love that, which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it and have you on again, is honestly, I think you're doing God's work. You know, and regardless of whatever that looks like for whoever, as you're watching this or listening to it, you know, whatever your God is, I just think that this is the good that's fighting against the evil out there. And honestly, I'm proud to know you, proud to call you a friend. And I just couldn't be more excited that people are actually standing up, because the one thing I can't stand is people who understand that something needs to happen and they just don't do anything. They just stand by or they choose to ignore it. It just it irks me on just like such a deep level. It just burns, you know? And so I'm just really happy that this is going on out there, and I'll do anything I can to get the word out, anything I can to help, whatever I can do, because this is something that is incredibly needed. Like you said, there's a reason why this hasn't existed before, and the fact that it does, I think, the people actually fighting for good need to do everything they can, even if it's just as simple as share a social media post to be able to protect this. So with that, where what can people do to help? Where can they go? What can people do? Say if they have expertise that they're willing to offer, or if they just want to give you some money, help fundraise. Like where can people go, and what exactly are you guys looking for?
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really appreciate those words. And you know, we're not trying to have a monopoly on doing this. We're about the
Right.
reasonable standard and safe action. You know, but you know, there's certain boxes that do need to be ticked to do things right and safe. You know, so. You know, and we don't even have like donation channels open, just to be clear. Like, there's never been about this. You know, right now,
Right.
what we have is organizesafety.org. That brings you to the encrypted form, the 4 channels, just like I said. If someone wants to help, you know, contact us through help organize safety. Otherwise, if they have a tip, the other 3 options, you know, whatever is applicable. Okay, so organizesafety.org. You know, we're looking for all kinds of help. You're going to know if you got a way to help, then, you know, give us a holler and let us know what you're thinking. We'll let you know what we're thinking. You know, that's really what it comes down to. I'm not trying to restrict to a certain area. And just to be honest, other people that I work with have more expertise on certain things. You know, we just have to evaluate it on an individual basis if someone wants to help and do that. We soon will have, you know, some donation lines more open. I mean, there are ways to obviously do that in context if
Right.
you're looking for that, but the channels on that aren't quite open as to where you can just click a button yet. But if,
Right.
you know, we're obviously, you know, it can be facilitated. Yeah, we're just, we're really getting this together to push hard. And it's just we need public attention, and you know, we need help. We need, as ridiculous it is, we need help boosting social media and public attention so we can leverage attention to demand conversations. What I personally would like is to get certain people in live conversations to where we can drop lines of questioning and lines of reasoning that they can't prepare for to wiggle out of.
Right.
That's, you know, there's only an extent of that. We're not trying to like trap people and fight them. No, but we're trying to get accountability and responsibility. And we're sick of lies,
Right.
and we're sick of people having time to prepare and give a public relations statement of BS. Right. So
Right.
anyways, organizesafety.org, and we appreciate you.
So on that, I think we'll wrap up here. We're coming to the closeout mark and everything, and I can't think of a better way to end this, anyways. So, any parting words? Let people know where they can find you, what you have going on, what you want people to know, and anything. Go for it.
Thank you. Organizesafety.org. If you're looking to hear from survivors of these behavioral modification programs, to where there's so much crossover in the UAP, NHI area, right, with GATE programs, if you're going back to the satanic panic, if you're going to MK Ultra, targeted individuals, so on and so forth, one of the largest libraries with full-length conversations with these survivors and whistleblowers with no censoring, and a caring, compassionate host that lets people talk. you want to look for the Imagination podcast. She has one of the largest libraries with full at-length conversations with these survivors, and you will see, what all common threads go through all of this. So I can't recommend that enough. That's my love and my wife, Emma Catherine. Now, other than that, I have my own personal thing that I do. I'm also strategically theatrical in ways. And, I'm kind of reaching to hit a demographic myself that doesn't always really resonate with other ways these things are disclosed, especially with certain survivors. So, I'm kind of reaching out my own thing, which is a little bit rougher in ways and so on and so forth. You can find me around, on the internet, so on and so forth. There's a lot of slander and things like that too, y'all. So just be careful who you follow and be careful what you listen to. I'm ready to have any at-length conversation, full and live. Keep in mind, yes, Rumble. When you're at Imagination Podcast, she had her YouTube deleted. It's going back up, but it's just like, it's not stable, and it's unfortunately like it's going to be deleted anytime. So, follow her on Rumble. Substack is great. And I'm about to release a series of articles on her Substack as well that's really going into like methods and exact things that have not been disclosed ever and really contemporary methods. And just as well as like just shining some lights on some deep aspects and showing the exact flow of some of these organizations and what's involved and just giving certain insight. But yeah, so Emma Catherine, the Imagination podcast on X is at the Emmapreneur. And on Rumble and, a host of other things, Substack. And, me, I am Gray Area Monarch on X and Gray Area Operator on other platforms or just Gray. And again, Organized Safety, organizedsafety.org. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for coming back on. Definitely want to get you back on. I think there's so much more that we can talk about. Plus, I want to keep up to date on what Organized Safety is doing. Like I said, I think this is incredible work that you guys are doing. And I'm so excited because it just seems like things are happening and this is something I want to support. I can't wait for that t-shirt. I'm so excited to start getting some of this merch.
We have that en route, by the way, because, there's a few things we have, but we have some awesome, stuff to where it's like crazy glow in the dark that holds like as strong as better than other stuff. Like, there's all sorts of stuff,
right.
But yeah, we're going to be distributing some like free and stuff like that too. But obviously we're going to have a merch thing too, where people can support it like that, because also we're hoping to catch it on. So I forgot about that.
Right.
And we have some of those, cause we got like the press and all that. So that's en route right now. So that's about to step up as well. So.
Hell yeah, I am so stoked. And hey, thanks again for coming on. Everyone, make sure and go check out everything in the episode description. Everything will be down there linked to Emma's podcast, her X account, also all of Gray and Organized Safety, everything that you can find down below. So make sure and do that. Other than that, make sure and go to risetoliberty.com/links. The best places you can find me are Telegram, X, and I'm actually using my Substack more. So you'll start seeing that. I've also got some articles that are like 90% done. They're on their way very soon. So be keeping an eye out for that. There's some really cool stuff. I just released not that long ago a list. I think last I counted, it was 200 or 300 confirmed and alleged CIA front organizations. It's just a huge list. It took a lot of work. And of course, anyone out there that knows of any corrections that need to be made or anyone that needs to be added to it, go ahead and send that. There's different channels that you can reach through contact, but that's risetoliberty.com/links, which does have a contact tab on that. So other than that, I would like to thank you for watching. If you found this useful, please hit the like, the share, the subscribe. Our big tech overlords do not like these conversations to get out to people. So this is entirely viewer, listener, and subscriber funded and grown and everything. So go ahead and share this. Otherwise, that's the only way it gets out. That's the only way that gets out. And these are incredible conversations that need more attention. So go ahead and do that. Gray, hang out for just a sec. And otherwise, uh, thanks for tuning in. And until next time, stay free, my friends.